My quiet suburban life turned into a nightmare when my HOA sent bulldozers to demolish my home over a security gate. But they never bothered to check who I really was. What happens when the homeowner they've been harassing turns out to be the state senator in charge of housing regulations? Comment below where you're watching from. I never wanted any trouble. All I wanted was to keep my family safe. After the Wilson family too doors down got robbed last month, their kids were home alone when it happened. The next week, someone broke into the Martinez house while they were sleeping. When old Mrs. Jackson's house became the third break-in target, I knew I had to do something to protect my daughter Sarah. The security gate wasn't even fancy, just a simple black iron design that matched our house. I made sure to check every rule in the HOA handbook before installation. Sarah helped me pick it out, saying it looked just like the ones in the nice neighborhoods where her friends live. We even got extra packages delivered that week because our regular delivery guy said he felt safer leaving them behind the gate. Everything was fine for exact 3 days. Then Karen Thompson showed up at my door while I was making dinner. I saw her coming through our front window, power walking up our driveway in her tennis outfit with that giant sparkly water bottle she always carries to her morning fitness walks, which really just mean gossip sessions with other neighbors. That gate has to go, she announced before I could even say hello. It makes the neighborhood look like a prison. She stood there with her hands on her hips, tapping her expensive running shoe on my welcome mat. The same Karen who had installed bright purple shutters on her house last spring without any approval. I tried explaining about the break-ins, showing her the police reports I'd collected. She cut me off mid-sentence. Well, I'm on the HOA board now, and this simply won't do. What's next? Guard towers. She actually looked around as if expecting to see watchtowers in my yard. That night, I found my first warning letter stuck to the gate with bright orange tape. The next morning, Karen was outside taking pictures of my house at 7 a.m. I watched through the window as she walked back and forth, documenting every angle, like she was gathering evidence for a court case. I decided to check the property records that evening. Something felt off about how quickly that warning letter had appeared. Turns out Karen had only been appointed to the board 2 weeks ago, filling a vacancy left by someone who moved away. She hadn't even been officially approved yet, according to the HOA bylaws I found online. The next day, 5 more neighbors got warning letters for things like unapproved flower colors and excessive bird feeder height. Each time I drove past Karen, how she was on her phone, probably reporting more violations. I started keeping a detailed log of everything, though I didn't know yet how important that would become. What really got to me was how Sarah started taking the long way home from school. Mom, she whispered one evening, Karen's daughter told everyone our house is bringing down property values. Is that why Tommy didn't invite me to his birthday party? My heart broke seeing her worried face. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. I was up late that night reviewing the HOA documents when I noticed something strange. Range in the financial reports. The board had suddenly started paying for emergency property consultations right after Karen joined. The amounts seemed oddly high for a small neighborhood association. As I closed my laptop, a car slowly drove past our house. The third time that evening, through the window, I could see Karen in the passenger seat. Her phone's camera flashed, lighting up the darkness. I started wondering if installing that gate had opened up something much bigger than a simple security issue. My phone buzzed with a text from my assistant at the state capitol asking if I wanted to reschedule tomorrow's housing committee meeting. I almost replied yes, but something told me I might need that legislative knowledge sooner than I thought. I had no idea just how right that feeling would turn out to be. Looking out my gate one last time before bed, I noticed a small group of people gathered at the end of my driveway, pointing and taking notes. Even in the dark, I recognized Richard Walsh's distinctive swagger, the HOA president, who hadn't enforced a single rule until Karen joined the board. What were They planning, and why do they care so much about one simple security gate? The morning started with Karen standing in her driveway, coffee in one hand and phone in the other, taking pictures of my house. Again, I watched from my kitchen window as she zoomed in on my gate, then my flowers, then my mailbox. The HOA's $100 daily fines were stacking up, but I refused to back down. 3 break-ins on our street in the last month, and they're worried about my gate's aesthetic. My daughter Sarah's car pulled into the driveway after school. She wasn't alone. Karen's kids were following her phones, out recording everything. I rushed outside just in time to hear them shouting, "Your dad's the criminal. He doesn't follow the rules." Sarah ran inside, crying, slamming her bedroom door. I tried calling Richard Walsh, the HOA president, for the 5th time this week. Straight to voicemail. Fine. I grabbed my laptop and started digging through property records. If Karen wanted to play this game, I needed ammunition. What I found made my blood boil. Her pool extension from last summer crossed property lines by 3 feet. No permits, no approval, just like Richard's garage that somehow got built without a single inspection. The doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, trembling as she handed me a stack of papers. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "Karen's been going door to door, making everyone sign a petition against you. She said if we didn't sign, she'd start finding violations on our houses too." I thanked her and added the petition to my growing evidence file. That evening, while walking my dog, I noticed Karen's car following me slowly down the street. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I waved politely, which seemed to infuriate her more. My phone buzzed. Another HOA violation notice, this time for suspicious behavior during non-business hours. Sarah came home the next day with more tears. Karen's daughter had spread rumors at school that we were drug dealers hiding something behind our gate. The school sealer called me in for a concerned discussion. I sat there, listening to their worries, knowing I couldn't reveal my position as state senator without making things worse. Not yet. I installed security cameras that weekend. Within an hour, Karen was at my door with 2 police officers claiming I was surveilling her property. The officers thankfully saw through it. "Ma'am," one said, "the cameras are clearly pointing at his own property." Karen stormed off, but not before shouting, "This isn't over." She was right about that. Monday morning, I found my rose bush is dead. Someone had poured something on them overnight. My cameras caught Karen's husband at 2 a.m., but when I showed the footage to Richard Walsh, he claimed it was inconclusive. That same afternoon, the HOA board posted a new emergency rule. All security cameras had to be approved by the board, effective immediately. I stayed up late, documenting everything, building my case, the selective enforcement, the harassment, the property violations they ignored for their friend. Sarah knocked on my office door around midnight. "Dad," she said, "maybe we should just take down the gate." "I can't take much more of this." I hugged her tight, knowing tomorrow would change everything. The certified letter from my office was already on its way to the HOA board, and this time they couldn't ignore it. As I turned off my lights that night, I saw Karen in her driveway again, this time with what looked like measuring tape. She was studying my house with Richard Walsh, pointing and taking notes. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. "Remove the gate by morning or we remove it for you." I smiled, saved the message as evidence, and went to bed. Let them try. They had no idea what was coming. Little did they know tomorrow wasn't just another HOA board meeting. It was also the day I'd be announcing my new position as chair of the State Housing Committee. But for now, I watched through my security cameras as Karen and Richard plotted in the darkness, completely unaware they were about to bulldoze their way into the biggest mistake of their lives. The sound of heavy machinery jolted me awake at 6:15 a.m. My daughter Sarah rushed into my room, panic in her voice. "Dad, there are bulldozers outside." I threw on my robe and ran downstairs, my heart pounding against my chest. The morning sun wasn't even up yet, but I could see the yellow warning lights flashing through our bedroom windows. I burst through our front door to find 3 construction vehicles parked on my Lawn Karen stood there in her perfectly pressed tennis outfit, phone held high, recording everything with that familiar smirk on her face. Behind her, Richard Walsh waved a stack of papers like a victory flag. Stop this right now, I shouted, my bare feet cold against the morning. Do you have no right to be on my property? The construction workers paused, looking uncertain. One of them, a younger man with kind eyes, actually took off his hard hat and seemed ready to leave. That's when Karen's shrill voice cut through the dawn silence. We have every right. Don't you dare stop. I'm recording this for our HOA records. They're in clear violation, and we have the emergency injunction right here. She turned to me, her face twisted with a satisfaction that made my stomach turn. Maybe next time you'll learn to follow our community guidelines. I pulled out my phone to call the police, but Richard stepped forward, waving the court order in my face. Don't bother, Judge Harrison signed this yesterday afternoon. Your gate isn't just an eyesore, it's been deemed an immediate threat to our property values and community safety standards. My hands shook as I scanned the document. There was in black and white. They'd gone to court without even notifying me. I thought about revealing who I was right then, but years of political experience had taught me timing was everything. Instead, I started recording on my own phone. Richard I said calmly, that injunction only mentions the gate. Why are your workers setting up equipment near my front wall? The question made him pause, but Karen jumped in before he could respond. Oh, the wall has to go too. It's all part of the same ugly security structure. You can't just build a fortress in our beautiful neighborhood. She turned to the small crowd of neighbors gathering on the sidewalk. This is what happens when people don't respect our community standards. The demolition crew chief approached with another document. Sir, I need you to step back. We're authorized to begin work, and if you interfere, we'll have to call the authorities. I noticed his company logo, Walsh Construction. Of course, Richard's own company got the contract. I watched in helpless rage as they started with my gate. The metal screeched as they tore it from its hinges. Karen's running commentary continued. See, everyone, the HOA protects your property values. This is justice. That's when Sarah, still in her pajamas, spoke up from behind me. Justice, you're destroying our home because you don't like how it looks. Her voice cracked, but she stood tall. Several neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Even some of the workers slowed down, but Karen wasn't finished. She walked right up to my property line, her phone still recording. Your father should have thought about that before he turned our beautiful neighborhood into a prison block. Maybe this will teach your family about proper community standards. The front wall came down next. Pieces of brick and mortar crashed onto my carefully tended garden bed. Sarah's mother had planted those roses. I felt something snap inside me as I watched them get crushed, but I forced us to keep recording every second of this would matter. Later, through my phone screen, I caught a detail that made my blood run cold. The demolition crew was crossing the property line marked by my surveyor stakes. They were tearing down sections of wall that weren't even part of the security addition. The HOA's own rules required property line verification before any demolition. I pulled up my property survey app documenting the encroachment. Richard must have noticed something in my expression because he suddenly looked nervous. Wrap it up quickly, he shouted to his crew, but I had everything I needed now. I turned to address the growing crowd of neighbors, many still in bathrobes and slippers. I want everyone to witness what's happening here. Notice the time, notice who's present, and notice exactly what's being destroyed. My calm tone made Karen's face twitch with uncertainty for the first time. As the sun finally crept over the horizon, I watched them destroy $23,000 worth of my property, but they'd made 3 critical mistakes: improper notice, property line violation, and biased contract allocation. I looked at my daughter, who was fighting back tears, and squeezed her hand. Don't worry, sweetie, sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. Little did Karen and Richard know, but tomorrow's housing Committee meeting was going to have some unexpected new business to discuss. I stood there in my robe watching chunks of my wall crash onto my fresh spring tulips. Karen's phone was still recording, her perfectly manicured nails gripping it tight while she narrated about justice being served. That's when Richard Walsh strutted over demolition order in hand, his gold HOA president pin gleaming in the morning sun. Maybe next time you'll learn to follow our rules, he said, trying to hand me the papers. I let them fall to the ground, feeling the anger I'd been holding back for months finally reach its limit behind him. My daughter, Sarah, appeared at the front door still in her pajamas, tears streaming down her face as she watched our home being destroyed. That's when my phone buzzed. My assistant, Emily's name, flashed on the screen, followed by 5 more calls from local news stations. I smiled for the first time that morning. Actually, Richard, I said, straightening my robe, I think it's time we discussed House Bill 1472, the one sitting on my desk at the state Capitol. You know, the HOA reform bill I've been working on as state housing committee chair. The construction workers stopped their machines. Karen's phone lowered slowly, her mouth hanging open. Richard's face turned from smug to shocked faster than his signature could bounce. A homeowner's check. He stammered, his hand starting to shake. State Senator Sarah Mitchell. Yes, the same person whose property you just illegally demolished without proper notice or due process. I pulled out my own phone and dialed Emily. Yes, please. Call Attorney General Roberts. Tell him I'm invoking Section 47B of the state property code and get me Commissioner Martinez. I want a full investigation into Oaked HOA's permit history. Karen tried to slip away, but I wasn't done. Oh, and Karen, those photos you've been taking, I'll need copies for the investigation. All of them, including the ones of my daughter you shared in your neighborhood watch Facebook group without permission. My security cameras had caught her trespassing numerous times to take those photos. Each snap of her camera was now evidence I'd been documenting everything, waiting for them to go too far. Today, they finally did. Sarah came down to stand beside me, no longer crying. She'd seen me fight for constituents' rights before, but never thought she'd watch me fight for our own home. A news van pulled up, then another. Karen is now frantically deleting photos from her phone, but she didn't know my team had already archived her entire social media history. Richard tried one last power play. The board vote was unanimous. We have witnesses. Interesting, I replied calmly. Would these be the same board members who approved your wife's unlicensed home business last month, or the ones who ignored Karen's illegal fence height? My office has satellite images showing quite a few interesting property modifications. More neighbors were coming out now, phones recording everything. The construction workers were packing up. Their supervisor, having received an urgent call from the city permit office. Through it all, I kept my voice steady, my posture straight. Years of legislative negotiations had taught me that true power doesn't need to shout. Emily, please make sure the press gets copies of our file. Yes, all of it. The selective enforcement documentation, the financial audits, everything. I turned to address the growing crowd. As your state senator, I believe in transparency. The people of our state deserve to know how certain HOA boards are abusing their power. Richard's hands are now visibly shaking. Karen had retreated to her porch, still clutching her phone like a shield. The demolition order lay forgotten in the mud next to my crushed tulips and pieces of my wall. I looked at my daughter and squeezed her hand. Honey, go get dressed for school. Mom's got some work to do. She smiled, understanding that this was more than just about our gate now. This was about every homeowner who'd ever felt powerless against arbitrary rules and personal vendettas. As news cameras started rolling and my phone kept buzzing with calls from other state officials, I couldn't help but wonder how many other HOAs across our state were abusing their power like this. By the time I was done, they'd wish they'd never touched my gate. I didn't sleep that night after the demolition. Instead, I made calls by morning. 3 state Investigators showed up at my door there, faces grim as they reviewed the photos. Of my destroyed wall, Senator, this goes deeper than your gate, lead investigator Martinez said, spreading out years of HOA documents across my dining room table. The first red flag appeared in Karen's own backyard, her pool, which she'd bragged about at every HOA meeting, extended 4T beyond her property line. I remembered her words, some of us know how to follow the rules. The investigators found no permit application, no approval process, just a single sticky note saying, approved R.W. Richard Walsh's initials. My phone buzzed with texts from neighbors. Now that the truth about my position was out, people finally felt safe coming forward. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 doors down sent photos of her rejected garden fence application identical to the one Karen had installed last summer. The Peters family shared emails showing they'd been fined $500 for their daughter's rainbow painted mailbox, while Richard's son had an entire mural on his garage door. I invited the investigators to our next HOA meeting. Karen walked in with her usual smirk, but it vanished when she saw their badges. Richard started the meeting as if nothing had changed. First agenda item, unapproved modifications. His voice cracked when Investigator Martinez stood up. Let's discuss modifications, Martinez said, projecting property maps onto the wall. Red circles highlighted 23 violations at board members' homes: Karen's pool, Richard's garage, the treasurer's unauthorized deck, the secretary's unpermitted basement. Each image hit like a hammer, and I watched their faces shift from confusion to fear. Sarah had been quiet since the demolition, but that night she helped me sort through documents from concerned neighbors. Mom, she whispered, pointing to a bank statement someone had sent. The HOA's emergency fund had been making monthly payments to a company owned by Richard's wife. The investigation revealed years of selective enforcement. Families who challenged the board faced immediate fines and threats. Those who played along, mostly Karen's social circle, enjoyed exemptions and special approvals. My gate wasn't an emergency, it was punishment for not bowing to their authority. Local news van lined our street the next morning. Karen tried sneaking out her back door, but her pool extension was now marked with bright orange surveyor tape. She saw me watching, and for the first time her mask cracked. You don't understand, she called out. We kept this neighborhood perfect. We protected our values. I walked to my demolished wall while my daughter's roses lay crushed. Perfect for who? Karen, the growing crowd of neighbors, investigators, and reporters waited for her answer. She just hurried to her car, leaving her phone behind on her driveway, the screen up with a message from Richard: delete everything. But it was too late. The HOA's carefully built house of cards was falling, and the next hearing would bring even bigger surprises. The investigators had found a connection between their selective enforcement and a local real estate scheme, one that would soon make my demolished gate look like just the tip of the iceberg. That evening, as neighbors gathered on my lawn sharing their own HOA horror stories, Sarah tugged my sleeve. Mom, look, Karen was in her backyard, frantically measuring her pool with a tape measure. I couldn't help but smile, knowing tomorrow's findings would make her pool the least of her worries. The real question now wasn't just about my gate or even the HOA's corruption. As I watched Investigator Martinez photograph Karen's pool, a thought struck me: how many other neighborhoods were suffering under the same kind of tyranny. I picked up my phone to call my fellow senators. This was about to become much bigger than our little subdivision. My hands were shaking as I walked into the state Capitol building, clutching a thick folder of evidence. The morning news was already running footage of my demolished home on repeat. As I passed the security checkpoint, I saw Karen and Richard sitting nervously in the waiting area, their fancy lawyer whispering in their ears they hadn't expected to be here today. I walked straight to my office, ignoring their shocked faces as they finally realized whose nameplate was on the door. State Senator, Housing Committee Chair. My Assistant Tom rushed in with more files. Hundreds of complaints about HOAs across the state. My story had opened the flood. Gates, the hearing room, was packed news. Cameras lined the back wall. I straightened my jacket and took my usual seat at the committee chair's desk, enjoying how Karen's mouth fell open. She had spent months talking down to me, and now she was about to testify before me. This hearing will come to order, I announced, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Today, we're discussing the Homeowner Protection Act sparked by recent events in my own district. I held up photos of my demolished home, but this isn't just about me. One by one, homeowners stepped forward. An elderly man described being fined for a wheelchair ramp. A single mom talked about her children's treehouse being torn down while they were at school. Each story made Karen sink lower in her seat. Then came the property records my team had uncovered. I projected them on the wall. Karen's illegal pool that somehow got instant approval. Richard's unpermitted garage addition that was mysteriously overlooked. Board members' relatives getting landscaping contracts without bids. Mrs. Thompson, I called Karen to testify. Could you explain why my security gate was an emergency violation requiring immediate demolition while your non-permitted pool expansion was approved in a single day? She stumbled through excuses about property values and neighborhood character. Her lawyer kept trying to whisper in her ear, but she wouldn't stop talking. With each word, she dug herself deeper. And Mr. Walsh, I turned to Richard, who was sweating through his expensive suit. These financial records show the demolition company that destroyed my home is owned by your brother-in-law. Would you care to explain that connection? The room erupted in whispers. Richard's lawyer advised him not to answer, but the damage was done. My colleagues on the committee exchanged knowing looks. This was bigger than one rogue HOA. I unveiled the new bill, explaining each protection in simple terms. No more selective enforcement, no more conflicts of interest, no more emergency demolitions without court review. Real appeals process is clear. Rules for everyone. Sarah slipped into the back of the room during the final vote. My daughter had missed school to be here with permission. Of course, she gave me a thumbs up as my colleagues raised their hands. One by one, the bill passed unanimously as Karen and Richard hurried out, ducking from the cameras. I heard Sarah telling a reporter, "That's my mom. She taught me that when bullies break your toys, you don't get mad, you change the rules so they can't break anyone else's." Outside the hearing room, other HOA residents were already lining up to share their stories. My simple security gate had unlocked something much bigger. Looking at their hopeful faces, I realized this was just the beginning. But as I read the text message that just popped up on my phone from an anonymous source, I wondered, had I accidentally stumbled upon something even darker in our state's housing system? I stood at my podium in the state capitol as the final vote was announced. The Homeowner Protection Act had passed without a single vote against it. The look on Karen's face in the front row was worth every moment of stress she'd put my family through this past year. Cameras flashed as I signed the new law. This is a victory for every homeowner who has faced unfair treatment, I said into the microphones behind Karen. I could see Richard Walsh, our former HOA president, pulling at his collar. The state investigation had uncovered so much more than just their vendetta against my gate. 3 moving trucks lined Karen's driveway. The next morning, her illegal pool extension would need to be removed under the new law's inspection requirements. Richard's unpermitted garage already getting demolition notices, the very rules they'd used to torment others were now being fairly enforced against them. My daughter Sarah watched from our kitchen window as Karen directed the mover's dad. Remember when she told her kids not to play with me because we were troublemakers? Sarah asked. I nodded, putting my arm around her shoulders. Now look who's leaving the neighborhood. The local news van pulled up just as Karen was loading her precious garden gnomes in her SUV. I hadn't called them. Turns out several neighbors had tipped off reporters about the HOA queen being forced to move Karen's face turned red when she saw the cameras for once she didn't rush to get. Interview my phone buzzed with a text. From my assistant, the state ethics board had finished their review. Richard and 3 other board members would be paying hefty fines for years of selective enforcement and illegal property decisions. Their emergency demolition of my wall had cost them their careers. Richard lost his real estate license, and his partner Karen had to shut down her home-based property consultation business. I walked out to check my mail, nodding to Mrs. Rodriguez. Across the street, she'd been the first to speak up about how the HOA had targeted her traditional holiday decorations while ignoring Karen's year-round plastic flamingo collection. Now, Mrs. Rodriguez's beautiful Pel Picado banners flew proudly, protected by the new law's cultural expression provisions. A car slowed down in front of my house. I recognized Karen's oldest son, Tommy, at the wheel. He rolled down his window. Sir, I wanted to apologize. Mom made us do a lot of stuff we knew wasn't right. I smiled and walked over water under the bridge. Tommy, sometimes the best lessons come from watching how not to treat people. Sarah came running out with an envelope. Dad, the neighborhood association elections are next week. The HOA had been reformed under the new law, with term limits and strict oversight. Several of my neighbors had nominated me to serve as president. I thought about how this all started with one simple security gate. Looking at my beautiful new gate installed under the reformed guidelines, I felt a deep satisfaction, not because I'd gotten revenge, but because I'd used my position to help every homeowner in our state. The security cameras caught Karen driving past one last time, staring at my house. I waved, but she sped away. My phone rang. It was the governor. Senator, there's something you should know, she said. We getting calls from other states wanting to copy your bill. How would you feel about taking this national? I looked at Sarah's proud smile, remembering all those nights she'd helped me research similar cases across the country. That evening, our doorbell rang. It was Tommy again, with his younger sister, Ashley. Can we help put up campaign signs for your re-election? Ashley asked. Shilly moms moving in with Aunt Susan in the next county, but we're staying here with Dad. He says you taught everybody an important lesson about using power the right way.